Have you ever thought about reincarnation? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV. This week, my special guest is soul writer Joanne DiMaggio. We're going to talk about her new book, Thomas Jefferson Reborn. We've also got performer and artist Victoria Gordon. She's created a new series called Pilot Season. You can also catch me on KCAA and my worldwide podcast, Guys Radio. Thanks for your support. Welcome to Guys Radio. Victoria Gordon, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start at the beginning. You're an actor, a singer, a writer, a director, a producer. Is there anything I left out?
You know, it's so funny. I was talking to my mom, I think yesterday or maybe today, about how people don't always know what to do when you have a big range of things you say you do. My mom's had the same problem her whole life. But what I've learned is it actually gives me more chances to just talk to as many people as I can and say, I can relate to this because I know how to do this, or I've been in this kind of situation, so I can relate to that. So even though it sounds like a lot, it all kind of interconnects and just gives me more chances to really connect with people.
I totally get it. Like when I wrote my novel, A Guy's Guide to Love, first of all, people thought it was nonfiction, but it's fiction. I believe in the power of story. And then I started mimicking the main character who writes a column about men for women. So I started doing blogging, and then I started doing Guys Radio. And now here we are. We're in the top 100 worldwide in our category in France, UK, Canada, Australia. We're in the top 200 in the US. It's just been growing and growing and growing, but it's not just about one thing. So it's good. I would think you would agree, Victoria, that when you're doing this type of work, you're always drawing on a skill set that you have. So it's not like you're always starting over in separate buckets, that the buckets kind of come together, and it's like you're weaving. It's like the ancient art of weaving.
Oh, yeah. It's all about finding ways. They all kind of intersect. And I think if I had really disparate things that I was doing, like if I could do finance and like opera, it might be harder to find a way to connect those two. But I happen to be doing things, I chose an extreme example. I happen to be doing things that really connect in a lot of ways. And I find ways to connect them where they don't actually connect.
Okay, well, we talked a little bit before we got on the air about, COVID and what's going on. So I have kind of a two-edged question to you, and that is about new Hollywood. How would you define the new Hollywood, and how is this changing with all the new platforms? And you're using some of them. And also, is there a post-COVID Hollywood? Because I think we're going to find that post-COVID is going to be like post-9/11 world. Now it's going to be post-COVID world. What is your perceptions of that? And what do you have to say about the entertainment industry and what you're going through?
Well, we've all gone through a lot. This has been a tough one for everyone in the industry of all ages. Unfortunately, a huge number of people have lost work completely or have substantially reduced the amount of work they have. So it's really caused a lot of issues just on a basic human level. On an entertainment level, things have started to pick up in a bigger way than I was expecting at this point, frankly, but it's still not allowing for all those people who lost work to really get back into the workforce. I think we are going to see a reduction in the workforce, which is unfortunate. I think some of that will last, but I'm also hopeful that with all the new platforms, we're continuing to give people more channels and opportunities to get their voices and their ideas out there. Of course, the challenge is monetizing that because people still have to eat and keep a shelter over their head. So it's like there's a mixed bag of good and bad that comes with this. At the same time, like I am saying, we do have a lot more channels. So you're seeing a lot more content from a lot more places and a lot more unique material. Like, for example, there is a big TikTok series. It's not a series, but a series of videos that's out on TikTok right now that's extremely popular. The type, like the little court reporter typewriter thing. I mean, it's just, there's interesting stuff and people are learning so much and experiencing so many things that I think there's a lot of potential to work that into entertainment in different ways.
Now, looking at the different platforms, traditionally you had, you come up with a show idea. This would be pilot season. We'll get into your pilot season. And you get to the showrunners if you can through your agent and representatives, or if you have something really good in adaptation or whatever. And then they trot it out and you see if you can get a pilot done. Nowadays, as you were saying, there's so much content and there's still a thirst for content because there's so much content consumption. And then there's so many different platforms. How do you, when you're working, determine, and we can start with pilot season. How did you determine which platforms to use and for how long?
I will tell you, that is something that is not always as easy as you would think. When the pandemic started, I started with Twitch because Twitch is really a streaming platform meant for live streaming. Twitch has not been perfect. I'm still a big fan, but there have been issues. And people say, well, why didn't you just go to YouTube? Well, YouTube wasn't quite there yet. And besides, I have issues with YouTube too. There's no perfect platform.
Right.
So for pilot season, since I wasn't doing live or lifestyle, they're definitely pre-taped very clearly. They have lots of transitions and effects that make it clear that they're pre-done. I thought, I'll put them on YouTube. That is like the primary video platform out there. But at the same time, it's a choice that comes with each individual project. I mean, if you're doing mostly music that's like recorded in a studio that sounds good, SoundCloud is probably going to be better than YouTube, because what are you going to put in as the video? A bunch of pictures? I mean, I've seen that done, but wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I mean, it's really about finding the right fit for the content. And since there are so many platforms, it can be challenging, but sometimes it's trial and error. It's just saying, okay, this one works, this one doesn't.
It's amazing with YouTube. We started our YouTube channel based off the podcast, and I saw which shows were really rating high, and they were about very specific topics. For instance, my highest rated one was about the secret space program. And it's such a niche, and it's like a UFO conspiracy theory type of thing.
Yeah.
That's something that people look for. And then I did some other research and found that on YouTube, there's 35 million channels, and people only watch for about 4 or 5 minutes. So you have to be really careful when you use YouTube to make it your content search driven, and also to realize that people are just taking very digestible bites with it. Because maybe, I think you probably did that because for your series, maybe YouTube wouldn't be the right way to go, because people are just looking for a lot of different stuff, like how to fix the pipe under your sink and change the battery in the car, and a lot of like how-to stuff.
Well, that's the thing, is that really the way we consume content is very different. When my dad was coming up in the industry, when my grandfather was coming up in the industry, there were 3 networks. I think my dad might have squeaked in with 4. But the point is, there was a very small market, and the goal was to appeal to as many people as possible within that, sort of grouping of channels. The exact opposite goal now. The goal is to get the most defined small audience and have that small audience be the most ardent followers of whatever it is you're doing. And one of the advantages of my set of pilots in that regard is that they're all pretty different. The audiences don't necessarily overlap. Like, I did one this past week that was really geared towards like maybe a 16 to 22-year-old female demographic, versus like I have one coming up in a couple weeks that's geared more towards like a family demographic. Like, it just, and you can see that like with your show with the space program, when you get into these really targeted groups, you might have, it might not have the millions upon millions of viewers that TV audiences think means that something's good, but you have really loyal, stable audience members who want to see more of that kind of content.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm thinking about doing my own YouTube, because the people I work with, I get invited to YouTube shows all the time. And if it's the right topic, the ratings go through the roof. And I'm like, wow, I'm monetizing their shows. Maybe I better get into the program the right way, because it's a whole different skill set. And there is a gold rush onto YouTube now. I mean, everybody's getting into it. And I don't think everybody understands how it works. I think you do. How did you, Victoria Gordon's my special guest on Guys Radio, and I'm loving this discussion because I'm getting a fresh perspective, and that's what I really need. And I hope our listeners out there need that also. Why do you pick comedy? Because you have it's really in your heart, from what I could tell.
It is, and I think it's genetic. My grandfather was a comedy writer, and he wrote for Jack Benny. And I mean, he started on the radio and then worked into television, and he did 40 straight TV seasons without a break. Not just all for Jack Benny, obviously, but I mean, it was just what he did. And then my dad also sort of followed him. My dad did more variety than comedy, but there was never really like a whole emphasis on drama. And it's only in recent times that I've begun to think, maybe I'd like to explore that too, because comedy was just what my family did. So it was really deeply ingrained in me from childhood.
Let's talk about pilot season, because that's really your big project right now. So it's 5 different shows, and they're debuting at different times, and they're different topics. What's the concept behind them? How many episodes? How do you determine that? What are the different topics? You kind of touched on it, but give us a little more in depth, Victoria.
Well, so there are 5 different pilots, and each one really takes a different world and a different perspective and a different group of characters on their own journey. So the first one we aired was called Behind the Times, and it's about a typical sitcom family living in the present day. So it's a satire of the classic TV sitcom with the family and all that. Whereas like 2 nights ago, we aired Underachievers, the second episode, which is about 2 teenage girls. And it's really like sort of I wouldn't call it edgy. It's like teen edgy. So it's like something you might see on Freeform, for example, which used to be ABC Family when I was a teen girl. And we have one coming up that's more of a dramedy. We have one coming up that's like a big dysfunctional rich family comedy. So they all are told from slightly different perspectives, and they all follow unique journeys. And I think what's nice about that is that there's something for everyone. If you don't like family sitcoms because that's just something you're sick of and you don't want to think about ever again, you might love our sort of more intimate dramedy that we're doing. And if you're a teenage girl, you might really get a kick out of Underachievers, but some of the other shows might just be not quite your speed because you're too young for them. So I try to give a little bit of something for everybody, but not all at once.
The work I've done it's very blue sky, and there used to be some blue sky shows in the kind of the rom-com area that I play in, and so there's Sex in the City, and my book was called like the male Sex in the City, and an Entourage, and that got too bro culture, and it really wasn't. There was a little aspect of some accusative misogyny when it got to the film, and then the bro culture thing went away, and then we had Me Too. Where do you see the consumer perspective going in terms of how you deal with men and women nowadays? Are men the bad guys now, or it's just they're turning the barrel, or is this something? Are we ever going to get like guy buddy shows anymore? Or is that over because you can't be two white guys running around New York in advertising?
No. Look, I had this conversation with my parents and my sister not long ago because it's a generational thing. Like my sister was reading a list on BuzzFeed of like sexist things that women have been conditioned to believe are normal.
Right.
And as we read them, we were going through and it was like, well, yeah, that's bad. Yeah, that's bad. And my parents were like, hearing it said that way, it's bad, but we never would have thought of that as bad if you hadn't just called it out in this specific way. It's really generational and it's really how people are taught. So I'm not saying there's not room for a two guy buddy comedy. There absolutely is, but it's about finding a way to make those two guys people that others can relate to beyond just two other white guys watching the show. And I think we've seen a lot of attempts at creating buddy comedies that have gone well. I think we've seen a lot that have gone less well. And I think it's about finding a sweet spot. It's about finding the right buddies and the right reason for them to be together and giving them just a more 21st century perspective.
How about the other aspect of that was kind of the blue sky positioning, where it seems like so many shows it's about shattered lives and people who are just dysfunctional families, dysfunctional people. Do you think that's the forever, or is that just a trend that we're going to come out of that and there's going to be some more blue sky stuff?
Oh,
How do you feel for your own work?
Well, I did this dysfunctional family show that I'm working on that's coming out in a couple of weeks. And that was based on, if you remember the show Soap, that was kind of my inspiration there because Soap poked a lot of fun at the dysfunctional family, pointing out how ridiculous that trope is. And I think mine does too. I think that we're in kind of a phase right now. I don't know if it's because of what's gone on in the world in the last few years. I mean, from the recession to now, it's just been a lot of dark television. I think this pandemic has made people realize that we can't just watch darkness all the time. I think there were a couple movies that came out this past year where I heard reviewers basically say this was a very good film, but I just couldn't handle it right now. And I think we're going to start to emerge and see people trying to push for more blue sky type material, more material that glorifies positive lifestyles and positive behavior and just generally is happier. I think there is going to be a hunger for that when we get out of this situation for sure.
I'm always wondering if I was waiting for a show to come out to return from hiatus because of COVID and to come back, and they're going through what we're going through. They're wearing masks and taking masks off and wearing masks and taking masks off. I was thinking like Billions would be a good one for that because it's New York. And I'm just wondering, do you think any show will come out and they'll actually portray what we've been going through with the masks?
Well, This Is Us has done a really good job so far. And they've really had the masks. They've had different issues with COVID. They had a birth episode recently and people couldn't be there for the birth. And they showed the birth, like people talking over FaceTime after the baby was born. And I actually think Billions could wind up being one of the best representations. However, I'm also terrified for Billions coming back because I'm afraid that we're going to see this really, it's been a very glamorous portrait of New York, and I'm very afraid for what we're going to see when they come back. So it's a double-edged sword. There will be shows that will show it very well, and then there will be a point where we'll say, oh my God, I can't. This is what I live with every day. I need to escape. I don't need to see the reality anymore.
Mm-hmm. My special guest on Guys Radio, Victoria Gordon. I'm loving this discussion. You really have your act together, and I say that very authentically and honestly. Now, you grew up in Beverly Hills. I assume you went to one of the schools there. What was it like, and how did you how did you center yourself and be so grounded and be able to develop then in the industry, but doing it in a really smart way where you didn't get caught up in the buzz, if you will?
My family. It's 100% my family. My mom grew up in Beverly Hills too. My dad grew up in Westwood. So for those who know California, we are true Angelenos. But my grandmother, particularly my grandmother on my mother's side, was a product of the Great Depression. And she had that Depression era mentality the rest of her life. I mean, we always did everything we could to find ways to save money, to be creative and reuse things. I never really thought of like wasting as an option. I remember being really shocked when I was like 10 years old and one of my friends told me that she used her dad's credit card to buy something and her dad never noticed. I mean, that's just not how we lived around here. Like we always, it's not that we needed to, like my parents didn't have to worry, thank God, but they also were very conscientious about money and very protective of what they had earned. And I think that they always raised us to realize that we were fortunate, and that even a generation earlier, our family wasn't as fortunate as we were now. So having that, and also being willing to give back. My parents were always very charitable with their time, especially. And having all that be part of my upbringing made a huge difference.
Cabaret, you're a young lady, you sing Broadway tunes. How did that all come about, and why Broadway? They're beautiful songs and they're storytelling. And, it's difficult for some people to really appreciate it because there's so much other music out there, but Broadway tunes really are timeless.
They are. And, I grew up listening to that. That's what I grew up with, was the Broadway channel on the radio and listening to cast albums. And I just loved it from a young age. So when it came time for me to sing, that's all I wanted to sing. And of course, I went through a phase in my maybe late teens where people said, well, you got to try other stuff, because you're young, you got to try pop, you got to try country, you got to try rock. And I tried everything. And nothing really suited me and my voice and my style the way classical traditional theater did. So I've always loved doing musical theater songs. And then I decided to do my own cabaret, in part because I heard Billie Lourd, who is Carrie Fisher's daughter, say something about how her grandmother wanted to know why she wasn't doing a cabaret show. And she said, Grandma, nobody my age does that. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, why not? Just why not? And so thank you, Billie and Debbie Reynolds, may she rest in peace, for sort of giving me that kick to realize, no, wait, there's no reason we don't. I can totally do a cabaret show.
Couple of questions, couple more. Do you need to know the rules to break the rules?
I actually do. I'm a rule person. And I think one of my improv instructors said it best. She said, rules are like manners. You learn all your manners. And then once you know what all the manners are, you figure out which ones you need in which situation. If you're going out with friends, do you need to have the same manners you would have if you got invited to tea at Buckingham Palace? No, but you know all of what you have and you use it accordingly. And for me, that's always been, I like to find out why rules are the rules. So I'll always research how things came to be or why we do it. And then I'll make my own decision based on whether it feels appropriate for the situation or not. But I think knowing rules and understanding why they exist is a really good stepping stone to actually breaking them and doing things your own way.
I agree with you 100%. You ever take a class and you have to learn something specific, and most of the class goes along with it. And there's always a couple of people who just start freelancing or doubting the teacher right from the beginning. And I always wonder what happens to those people. Are they Keith Richards, who just gets the music on the antenna coming in, incoming, or do you really, I'm a plotter. I learn the rules and then I decide which ones to break or how to stretch them. And it sounds like you're very grounded, and that's kind of your approach also, Victoria.
Yeah.
Best advice you've ever received, since you are from a Hollywood family, and about the business or life itself?
I'm going to tell a little story that's kind of legend in my family. When my dad was 17 years old, there was a big teacher strike here in LA. It was huge. It shut down the schools for 2 months, and it threatened my dad's prom. And he's about to graduate, and he's really upset because he feels like he's being pushed out into the world without any of the trappings of graduation, but also any of the guidance that you get on your way out of school. So he's really upset. He's moping around, and my grandfather's outside. He says, hey, Neil, come here. I want to talk to you. And my dad goes outside. He says, okay. He says, I need to give you some really important life advice. And my dad's expecting some big, epic, secret of life kind of thing. My grandfather says, never buy a cheap hose. My dad says, and he says, don't buy one of those cheap hoses that's going to kink up on you. Spend the extra money and buy the good hose, and you'll have a good hose for the rest of your life. Never buy a cheap hose. My dad's like, okay. And he walked off with that, and he's like, what the heck's my dad on? And now years later, my dad, it's still something that means a lot, because the message my grandfather was trying to send was clearly, don't take a shortcut now to save something, money, time, whatever, when you're going to just have to take the long road later. Work your way all the way through it now. And it's harder, and maybe other people are going to pass you, but eventually you will find your way. And in fact, my dad just had his birthday. And so for his birthday, I got him a needlepoint for his office that said, never buy a cheap hose. And
I love it.
He nearly started crying at his birthday celebration. That wasn't my goal, but it happened. So that's my thing, is don't take the easy path. Do what you need to do to get it done right.
I love it, because I was going to ask you, what would your advice be? It sounds like you took the advice and that's what you would share. So Victoria Gordon, you're going to be a star. You already are inside, and it's going to come out everywhere. I really feel that. Tell us where we can find out when pilot season's running, where it's running, what's next for you, where people can find out more about you.
Okay, so for pilot season, you're going to want to check our Instagram, which is at TV Pilot Season. And there we have links to all the info. We have info about the cast. We have a little behind the scenes stuff, and you just get everything you need right there. For me personally, the Victoria Gordon is my Instagram handle, but my website is thevictoriagordon.com. And if you go there, you can catch up with everything that I've ever done, everything that I'm going to do. You can contact me. I always respond. I love talking to people, so feel free, and just keep up with what I'm doing that way.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much for being my guest on Guys Guys Radio. I wish you all success. Victoria Gordon, our special guest today. Thank you.